Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today we are doing my fall recommendations. I have already filmed and uploaded my fall TBR if you want to see what books I'm hoping to read this fall. But today I thought I'd film some of the books that I have already read that I would recommend that are fall themed or just feel like books that seem fitting to read in the fall. That being said, there are a lot of books that are much more fall themed than this that I just haven't gotten around to reading. So this is going to be strictly limited to books that I have read and that I would recommend. Some of them have some caveats, but these are all books that I would ultimately recommend you try out depending on what type of books you like to read. I have categorized these into a few different categories. We are going to start with mystery thrillers because in my mind, those are just the perfect ones for fall. I love reading mystery thrillers year round, but in the fall is a really, really good time to read them. Starting out with, I think this might be the only YA mystery that I have, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I did very recently read this one and I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure if it was going to be one of those situations where the internet has overhyped the book, but I actually thought it was really fun. I will say this one isn't super fall themed aside from the fact that it's a mystery, so take that as you will. If you want a good YA mystery, this would be the one. This is about Pip, who is a senior in high school. She's doing a senior project, and for it she decides to go out and solve a unsolved murder disappearance case in her town. And it was really fun. I thought there were really fun characters. It is not the most crazy plot twist, but I did think it was done really well. I thought there were some very fun twists in this book, but really it's just a fun mystery with some really fun characters, and that's the main appeal of it in my mind. So if you want a good YA mystery, this would be the one I'd recommend. And then another mystery, if you're wanting one that fits more into the dark academia vibes, this one I read not too long ago, and it is Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes. Now this is one that I wouldn't necessarily point blank recommend to everyone. I think there's a very specific audience that would enjoy this. This is definitely more, I would say, sides on an adult book. It is much more humorous. This isn't like full-on like twisty thriller plot twist type of a book, so if you're looking for something like that, this is not for you. This is more if you want something that's a bit humorous. It's definitely a school vibe. Basically it's the school that teaches you how to murder people, and it is specifically centered around following 3 former students and telling you their stories. So it's a fun one. I don't know if I would recommend this to everyone, but if it's something that sounds down your line, this one could be one that is interesting. Moving on to more of the thriller side of things with this next recommendation, I do really enjoy all of the books by Alex Michaelides. Something like that. I'm not sure if that's how I was saying his name, but the one that is the most fall themed in my opinion is The Maidens. I will say this one's probably my least favorite of his books, but it's still good. It is definitely one of the darker, more serial killer-esque ones. Less of like a psychological thriller like the other ones. I feel like Silent Patient, if you've read that, is much more psychological. This one is much more slasher-esque, if I could put a thing on it. It's also very dark academia vibes. You follow the main character, who is a therapist, and her niece is a student at Cambridge, and when there is a murder on the campus, she comes up to try and make sure her niece is doing okay, and then she ends up deciding that she is positive that the murderer is this one professor, and so she sets out to prove it, and it goes through all sorts of crazy stuff. But yeah. This is another one with maybe a bit more adult content. I wouldn't recommend this to younger audiences, so take that with a grain of salt if you are concerned about content stuff. There's nothing so crazy. I do remember there being a bit of swearing though, so keep that in mind. But if you're wanting to pick up one of his books for fall, this would be the one. And then a whole series, but I'm just gonna talk about the first book. This is the Robert Langdon series by Dan Brown. Book 1 is Angels and Demons. This one, again, is not so much necessarily fall themed, but they are very fun mystery thrillers, all centered around the competition between religion and science, pretty much. You're following Robert Langdon, who is a professor at Harvard on religious symbology, and he gets called in to consult on a murder that has something to do with the Illuminati. And so he sets out to solve it. It's this crazy thing. Most of it is set in the Vatican. And yeah, it just is super fun. I love the whole series. This might actually be my favorite of the series, so I definitely start with book 1. If you've read the other ones would all be great options. You don't necessarily need to read them in order, but I do think it's kind of fun to follow it because occasionally there are references to the other books. So it's fun Easter eggs if you read them in order, but you don't necessarily need to. The most popular one is book 2, which is Da Vinci Code. A lot of people seem to know that one better, but yeah, I would recommend Dan Brown, Robert Langdon series. And then the next set of books that I have are kind of more on the mystery, less thriller side, and they're all a little bit older vibes. But the first one is The Red House Mystery by A.A. Milne, and this is the same author as the original Winnie the Pooh stories, which is kind of funny. But basically in the beginning of this book there is a little, is it a foreword maybe? An author's note, an introduction, and the author basically, he explains that he has a lot of gripes with how detective stories are written, and so he decided to write his perfect detective story, and that's what this is. It's set in a place called Red House. You've got a amateur detective, you've got secret passageways, people in costume. It's really fun. I did read this all in one sitting on a plane back from London where I bought it, and I just think that this would be a great fall one if you want just a safe mystery. I love old mysteries because you're totally safe content wise. But yeah, Red House Mystery, I would highly recommend. This one was a great one. And then it wouldn't be me and a mystery fall recommendation if I didn't go through some of my favorite Agatha Christie books. I love pretty much everything by Agatha Christie. Unfortunately, the one book that is probably the most fall coded is Halloween Party, and that's the one book by her that I didn't like. So you can try Halloween Party, but it was not my favorite of hers. It took me so long to read it, and I just couldn't get into it. So I picked 3 books that I would highly recommend. These are some of my favorites. Again, maybe not the most fall coded other than that they are mysteries, and it's Agatha Christie, so of course it fits with the fall. First one, and this is one of my all-time favorite ones of her books, is Why Didn't They Ask Evans? This one is probably one of her more hard plots to follow. I will preface it with saying that. So if you haven't read an Agatha Christie, just be aware that this one I felt was a little bit harder to follow. But basically you are following this boy who works at a golf course, and he goes and like picks up balls, and he comes up to this edge and he sees a body down at the bottom of the cliff. And so he goes down, and this guy is dying, and he manages to hear the guy's last words, which are, "Why didn't they ask Evans?" And so then he goes into this whole thing trying to figure out what this man was talking about and solving all these mysteries, and it gets really twisty and crazy. The little miniseries show that they made of this was also really good. I obviously have the version with the actors on it, and I thought they did incredibly well. It has a few differences from the book, so I would read the book first and then we'll watch the show, but they did a really good job. And then the next one, if you want to read a Poirot book, that is one of her big main detectives, I would recommend just starting at the first one. You can technically read the Poirot books in any order, but I would recommend starting with the first one. I feel like a lot of people recommend to start with Murder on the Orient Express or Death on the Nile because those are kind of 2 of her most popular ones, but those are not where I would start. I felt like those ones are some of the slower ones, and so the more I've read, the more I think that that is not the place you should start with Agatha Christie. But this one is one of your classic locked door mystery type of things. I'm trying to remember exactly what went down in this one. Yeah, that's pretty much as you need to know. Going into this book, I feel like going into Agatha Christie's Pretty Blind is good. Just know it's a Hercule Poirot, it's his first case, and it's a locked door mystery. And I just think Poirot is great, but I do think you need to understand that he's just a little finicky, and just find the humor in his personality, and then you will appreciate Poirot. And then the last Agatha Christie I wanted to recommend is another one that is a standalone. It doesn't have a continuing detective, and that is Crooked House. This one is also set in a big mansion, and obviously you have somebody that's been murdered. Basically, you've got an amateur detective who is working with the actual detectives, and he's like engaged to the granddaughter of the person that died, I think, something like that. And he comes in, and it's your classic amateur detective, kind of stumbles across the answer to it in partnership with the real detectives. So that one's a really good one. I would highly recommend if you want one that's just a standalone, not intermingled with other books. Okay, that wraps up the mystery thriller section. The next one is kind of my randoms, so the ones that I just have like one off of a genre, kind of a dill. So we'll just work through those and then we'll get to fantasy at the end. And the first one in my one-offs category is I do have one Western that I would recommend, which is so random, I know, but this is The Haunted Mesa by Louis L'Amour. This is a mystery, so it kind of fits in the other ones, but it is a Western. Basically, you're following this guy who is a ghost hunter, and he has a friend who is an archaeologist that is doing digs on some ruins in, I believe it's either in Arizona or southern Utah, somewhere around there. And so he's digging up this old thing, and he gets this call that sounds super sketchy, only to find out that his friend has disappeared. And so he goes down this whole mystery, supernatural hunt thing to try and find his missing friend. So you get some of the elements of a mystery, but you also get some ghost type stuff, some supernatural things, and so I feel like it's a good fit for the fall. Just be aware this is a bit of a slow burn. I definitely feel like it was more interesting the first time I read it, and the second time I read it, it was a little slower. So just be a heads up on that. But if you like the Western vibe, but you want a fall mystery, this is the perfect middle ground of the two. And then this next one's not the most fall, but I feel like fall is a good time to start into series. I also feel like it is a great time to read comfort reads. And one of my comfort reads is a book that I read a lot when I was a kid, and that is 39 Clues. They do have a mystery element to them, so they got that going for them, but I feel like it just is a great time, even if you don't pick up 39 Clues, to go and read a comfort read of something that you read when you were a kid. I feel like that's just the perfect time to go back and reread them. It's the beginning of the school year, so it's about the time that you probably would have been reading it as a kid anyways. But 39 Clues is my go-to one when I want to reread a book that I loved from my childhood. And then the next two are classics that I feel like are somewhat fall themed. Maybe not totally, but they're books that I feel like just seem like the atmosphere is fall. The first one is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I don't exactly know what is fall feeling about this to me, but it just seems like the right era, and maybe it's just that this was a book that's required reading for a lot of schools, so it feels like back to school time is a good time to pick it up. But I don't know. To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't feel like this needs much more explanation. I just feel like this one is a good one. I think there's good reason why this is required reading in a lot of schools. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend picking it up. And I do feel like something about it just feels fall in my mind. And then the next one is Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Again, this one isn't particularly fall themed. Like, there's not a lot of fall stuff going on in this one, but I feel like fall is a good time to read kind of longer, slower books. Because, I don't know, it just feels like you have more time that you're spending cozy in your house, and so you can actually pick your way through some longer, thicker books. And this is one of my all-time favorite classics, so I felt like it was just a good one to throw in here. I would recommend Tale of Two Cities. I know not everybody loves Dickens' writing, but I quite enjoy it, and I need to get to another one of his books at some point. And then I do have one nonfiction, and this one is kind of super out of left field, and this might not feel fall-coded at all to other people. And I would say that this is only if you really, really are interested in this topic or reading biographies. But this is Magellan, and it is by something Joyner. What's the actual name? Tim Joyner. And this book took me forever to read, but something about the like ship detailed learning about history feels like a fall thing to me. I feel like it kind of fits in with the dark academia vibes of learning something just for the sake of learning it. And so I felt like I should include at least one nonfiction book in my fall recommendations, and so this is it. Again, this one is super slow. I wouldn't just point blank recommend this to everyone. This is kind of you need to be into reading nonfiction biography type things. I will say there were a lot of details about boats that I just kind of skim read because I don't understand like directions and how boats navigate. Still don't after this book. This book is not going to explain it to you, but this was a very fascinating read. I learned a lot of things that I feel like we all kind of know about Magellan, but there are so many things to the story that I feel like don't get talked about, and so it was very fascinating. So if you want a book like that, I know that it's super out of left field, but there you go, Magellan by Tim Joyner. All right, and then the last category is going to be fantasy. I feel like a lot of people like to get into fantasy in the fall. I personally feel like fantasy is a year-round thing, and I also feel like there aren't a lot of fantasies that feel super specific to fall in my mind. I feel like there are a lot more that feel specific to spring and winter in my mind. So I tried to pick some that I felt like fit a bit better. I feel like there are more fairy tale fantasies are spring in my mind, and the more mythical creatures, vampires, stuff like that, it feels more fall to me. So I don't know, take that as you will, but these are my fall fantasy recommendations. First one is Theodosia and the Serpents of Chaos. Again, this is another comfort childhood read for me, but basically this book is about this little girl named Theodosia, and she lives with her two parents who are the curators of an Egyptian museum in England. And basically she has the ability to sense all of the dark magic that is attached to these artifacts that her parents were bringing in, and they're completely unaware of it. And so she takes it upon herself to go and uncurse all of the items in the museum so that they don't have issues. And it's just fun. There's a little bit of a mystery element to it sometimes. And it's just this 11-year-old girl who is casting out demons and curses in an Egyptian museum. So yeah, it's super random, but I feel like the whole Egyptian mythology dark curses feels like a good fall time read for me, and I probably should find the second book of this. It is a whole series, so I would like to read some more of them. And then another one that is more of a younger age range fantasy is The Alchemist by Michael Scott. Not to be confused with The Alchemist, that's a classic. This one is part of the Secrets of the Immortal Nicholas Flamel series. And this one basically is about these two twins who somehow manage to find Nicholas Flamel and have a run-in with him, and then they get caught up in this whole magical world that is drawing from all sorts of different types of mythologies, all different types of magic. You're just getting a whole bunch of different things combined into this one. It's got a little bit more of the mystical feel, so I think it can fit in with fall. This is definitely, you could read it whenever. It's not particularly set in fall, but if you want more of like a middle grade to YA, somewhere in that range, this one could be a good pick for you. And the covers are really good. And then one more that fits into the younger age range is The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. This is book 1 in the Narnia series. And I think that there is some debate on whether you read this first. Chronologically, this is first in book 1 in the box set, so I would start there. But specifically why I'd start there is because book 2, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, is very wintry to me. So I would read this at the end of fall, and then you can go to book 2 in the winter and then just kind of follow through it. So I think the fall is a great time to start the series. And this one just has a lot of good nostalgia around it for me. But if you don't know, I feel like most people know The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but this book is actually the prequel to it. I won't say much more without spoiling it, but this one is more of a prequel book, and I would highly recommend it. And then, moving into some of the more adult-esque fall reads, this one is probably the most specifically fall-themed book in this video, and that is The Lights of Prague by Nicole Jarvis. This is a vampire book, but not how you're used to seeing vampires in like YA. It is set in Prague in the 1800s, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah, 1868. So it's very vibey Prague. You have these vampire creatures. They're not actually called vampires, but they're much more freaky vibes of vampires. And then you have another main character who is one of the Lamplighters, but the Lamplighters are secretly the monster hunters of Prague. And so he is hunting down vampires, and then your other main character is one of the vampires, and I'm sure you can see where I'm going, but this isn't like your classic YA just a love story type of thing. This is much more dark, much more gruesome. There are tons of other creatures. There are will-o-wisps, there are ghosts, there are all sorts of crazy things going on at night in Prague, and you're mainly following one guy whose job it is to hunt them down, and him coming around to maybe all the monsters aren't quite so bad, but there are definitely some that are really bad. So you're kind of following his bounds of trying to figure out, oh, maybe I don't need to kill all the monsters, but there are some that we definitely do need to kill. So yeah, I will say there's one scene in here that is a little more than fade to black in my opinion. So if you are trying to avoid spice scenes, at the bottom of page 214, you can see it coming. I would just stop there and skip to the bottom of 216. So there's your heads up, but I did really enjoy this book. It is very well written. I was pleasantly surprised. I picked it based off of the cover and it did not disappoint. And then the last 3 books that I want to recommend really quick are all Brandon Sanderson's. He's obviously basically the master of fantasy, and so I do have several of his. First one is Mistborn. Obviously this is one of his most popular series, and I actually really did enjoy it. This one has a bit of some darker themes, which makes it, I feel like, fit in with a more of a fall winter reading experience. If you don't know, it is this whole world where you are following this crazy magic system. You've got, basically the premise of it is, what if the bad guy won the war? And so they're living out the after effects of the bad guy now being the supreme ruler. And then you're following this crew of thieves who are going on a heist essentially, and things just kind of spiral from there. Super fun, would highly recommend. Mistborn's always a good place to start with Brandon Sanderson books. And then the other Brandon Sanderson that I want to recommend really quick is The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. Hopefully I got that name right because I don't actually have the book on me, but this one is somewhat of a mix between sci-fi and fantasy. You're following this guy who wakes up in medieval England. He has no memory of how he got there, and he is just surrounded by shredded up bits of paper of what he comes to discover is the handbook that is supposed to be helping him out. And he goes through this whole situation of people thinking he's this magician, and it's just fun. It's definitely a very humorous book. It is a standalone, honestly, unfortunately, because I really would love to read more of this character, this world. I think it'd be super fun, but it is a standalone. So for those of you that are looking for standalones, that is a major plus. For those of you that have read it and loved it like I did, it is kind of sad. But that's the other Brandon Sanderson. And then I did have one more fantasy that I was thinking was Brandon Sanderson, but it is definitely not, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is classic fantasy, dark academia. It's super popular. I don't know if I even need to jump into explaining what it is, but basically you're following this boy who gets brought over to England for the purposes of becoming a translator, because all of the magic in this world is based off of the stuff that is lost in translation. And then you're following his life of just trying to figure out and navigate being used for his being foreign and knowing another language, and you've got corrupt school officials and all sorts of things, secret societies. It's fun. It's a good time. And then I thought I'd end off with just a couple audiobook recommendations really quick, one of which is The Watchers by A.M. Shine. This one, I will caveat, is definitely an adult book. It is definitely probably into the horror genre. There's quite a bit of swearing. They're Irish, so take that as you will. They, yeah, went with it. Obviously, Irish swear a lot, and so this book does swear quite a bit, but this is very fantastical horror, perfect for fall, perfect for Halloween. It's based off of Irish folklore, and you just get these really creepy characters. It is people getting trapped in this forest by these creatures called the Watchers, and they're trying to escape, and they have to stay in the light or you die. Yeah. There's also a second book coming out this October, which I'm really excited about. That is the sequel, and that one is on my fall TBR. Another book that I would recommend that is an audiobook is The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I'm currently in the middle of the second one, but I do feel like these would be good if you want kind of a slower, just follow along the characters type of a fantasy that feels somewhat fall vibes. I feel like medieval England just feels kind of like fall, and so this one would be a good fitting one for fall. That was a lot of books to go through. Hopefully you got at least one book from this that it seems interesting for you to read and pick up this fall. I am definitely looking forward to all of my fall reads. If you guys have any recommendations that would be your main fall recommendations, please leave them down below, because honestly I read books like this year round. I don't super theme my reading around this season always, so most of the books that are fall themed in most people's minds I'm probably reading year round. So if you have recommendations, please leave them down below. I would love to read some of them. And without further ado, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one very soon. Bye.